Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am your guide and host, Courtney Anderson. As always, I encourage you to stop by CourtneyAnderson.com and share any ideas, feedback, questions, concerns, or anything else that's on your mind with us. So, today we have a show that is part of our Failure Flashback series. And of course, our failure flashback series is inspired by my own reflections upon my own failures. So much of what we do in so many of these programs is people get to share things that they felt, were that quote worked, things that helped them surpass their goals. And so I'm delighted to do that in a lot of the areas, many of the programs. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We did this and then it was successful. We did this and then that succeeded. And, here's a solution you should try based on this. And here's what I know from the academic degrees that I have completed and my professional experience. Let's try this and this and that. Okay, great. It's great to have the ability to provide potential solutions. It makes people feel good about themselves. The reality, though, is to be fair and honest, there are many, 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 if not more, shows and programs we could provide where all I do is talk about the things that have failed. I don't necessarily stick with that calculation. I don't want to go out and have 80% of the programs be about all my failures, the things that I have endured or even created for myself that were really, really poor choices with really poor outcomes. But I do want to give some amount of our program space to these issues, because I think sometimes when I'll talk to people, just recently I was at some events and there were some um, other professional speakers and writers, personal empowerment people that were at this social event, which is normal because that's one of my businesses, and a lot of my personal social friends are in that business. And so sometimes what I'll encounter is there when someone has a person who's a supporter of theirs, someone who is attends their speeches and purchases their books and programs. Sometimes people put that other person on a pedestal, right? And they're so focused on, they have the answer and they, succeeded at this and that and they did this and that. And I think it can become a little bit distorted in terms of the view, and it also can become potentially sometimes really unhealthy. Nobody has all of the answers. That's the truth. Some people have some answers that are credible that you should use potentially as action items for you in your own life, because they have the expertise, the experience, and knowledge base, right? So if I'm talking to somebody who is the highest level certified auto mechanic and they've got 25 years of experience with my type of vehicle, and they're talking to me about what they would advise, they're a credible source, right? If I'm talking to somebody who tells me that their third cousin sometimes fixes cars in their driveway for free, and they think their cousin would tell me to do something, that's not the most credible source. Now, both people are telling me about what to do to fix my car. One person has formal professional training that's certified and has completed that and continues to have continuing auto mechanic experience and education, works in the field every day, has decades of experience, and really is one of the top experts on problem solving with that vehicle. The other person is just somebody who's like, hey, I love cars, and every once in a while I go out in my own area, driveway, parking area, and I tinker on cars, and here's what I think. So my point is, we talk about this in a lot of programs, right? There's this quest so many people are on. What's the answer? What's the answer? And my argument is that's why we call the show Solutions, is that we're throwing out ideas that may be actionable or helpful for you. They may not. And very rarely is there a situation where there's only one quote answer. I mean, there's often things that we can talk about, but they'll be dependent on your individual facts of what's happening specifically in your life and what you want. So I don't want it to be ever a situation where people think like, oh, look at this professional, even if they really do have a lot of information. You never want to misinterpret and think they know everything. And I say that as somebody who comes from a lot of professional fields where sometimes, like I said, it's the person who attends a person's speeches and programs and is really a fan and community member of a certain expert. But it also works the other way too. Like I said, in some of the professions I'm in, people's own egos get very inflated. Now, I don't think I'm in the professions where probably you see the biggest inflated egos. I would think, I don't know, and I'm not trying to disparage anyone, but I would think maybe some politicians might have really big egos simply because the nature of that job, right? If you don't have the ability to convince other people that you can change their lives, right? Their entire societies by voting for you and giving you a whole bunch of power, then you can't even get into the job. So I would think that that would encourage people who have either a lot of competition in their spirit and they're able to withstand the rigors of politics. And I would think that also you, at some level, your ego needs to be big enough to believe you can actually do it. Convincing people you can do something is actually much easier than actually convincing yourself. So I would think that's the kind of business. I'm sure competitive, Olympic caliber athletes. I would also think that's an area where it's very similar, right, to politics. You're out there kind of individually. It's a competition. And you have to, again, pump up your own ego and your own sense of self. Like, can I be the best in the world? Am I the best in the world? How do you keep, getting back up every day to, stay at this, at that level? I would think those are some examples of someone who is not an athlete anyway, or never had any interaction personally with politics. I would think those are some jobs where you'd see people with really big egos, where they start to believe that, oh, fail? Who, me? Never. But I do see a little of it. You see it sometimes with some lawyers or people in the legal field who have a lot of power, right? So maybe they're in a position where they do determine what happens in people's lives. Maybe they're either power through the political system as a politician, power as a lobbyist, power as a jurist, power as a uh, legislator, people who are often in academia, people who are professors, and literally their entire service, right, that they are trading for income is their own expertise. They write books about their own ideas and what they think and their own analysis, and they give consultations and speeches about it, and they're appointed at universities based on this. It's actually, in some ways, very similar to the professional speaking industry. So you do get, some sense of ego, and it's important for us to take time, whether we're the person who's the consumer of the information or we're the person who's delivering it, to remember and acknowledge we have some information that might be credible and helpful and actionable. We don't have all the information, and we have a lot of issues in our own experiences that have been not just they didn't succeed, wildly, but they failed. And we continue to have challenges in our lives where we fail at things, and owning that and sharing that internally is healthy. And every once in a while, I think it's a good idea to remind people who are part of our professional programs and development. They are the experts in their lives. They have the ultimate decision to make in their lives. You never want to just blindly believe and adhere to everything that someone else says, even if it turns out after you have a critical examination review that what they said was accurate. Okay, great. But you want to make sure that you're always in charge of your own analysis in your own life. So all that's to say why the failure flashback. It's supposed to be like a time machine effect. Failure flashback, why it exists. The specifics of the different show topics to me are secondary to the whole just acknowledgement of here's some painful, embarrassing, difficult, sad, humiliating, embarrassing things to share, because it's always difficult to talk about the things that went not awesome. um, they were not awesome at all. They were the opposite of awesome. They were horrible. And I just use the word failure because I think it's the most effective in conveying that sense of embarrassment and regret sometimes, and shame, and just you think to yourself, how did I make such stupid decisions? And so we've had other shows in the series, certainly where we talk about really specific failure events or failure processes that I am embarrassed, but I think it's helpful to describe and share with people. On this specific show, we're talking about I let someone else make me doubt myself. I let someone else make me doubt myself. Even the title, just talking about this episode topic, it's creating for me a wealth of emotions, because so much of what we do in so many of the programs, and so much what I've done professionally, is trying to help solve problems. And yet all of that is predicated on me believing that I'm able to be of service. We understand that the power of an individual to destroy themselves with bad choices and self-abuse and negative feedback and self-harm is incredible. It's incredibly powerful. And when I even reflect back on the times in my life when I let someone else make me doubt myself, again, it brings a flood of emotions with it. Now, one thing I want to point out is that in the show title, I have the idea that I have the words "make me," right? That's sort of in quotes, and the reason I've sort of set that off is, in so many other programs that we discuss the idea that other people can't make us do things. Other people are not able to, quote, push our buttons. And we talk about this in a variety of contexts, right? We talk about this in our behavior. And I give a lot of examples how, certainly when I practiced criminal defense law and family law, and people were engaged in violence, domestic violence, violence against just anybody. And many times people in domestic violence would say, yes, I did, punch my mother-in-law. Yes, I did, push my kid down some stairs. Yes, I did take my spouse and stun gun them or run them over with my car. But then they'll say to me, and they've said to me in real life, and that's one part of the flood of these emotions, is they'll say, I did do that thing, but here's the deal. They made me do it. They pushed my buttons. I asked them to stop nagging me, or I asked them to shut up, or I asked them to go clean their room, or I asked them to load the dishwasher, or I told them to do it. And I didn't ask just once. I asked a couple times. And then they wouldn't do it, and I kept warning them. I warned them and said, hey, you're really pushing my buttons. You're really getting to me, and you need to go ahead and do what I said. And then when they talked back, or they didn't do what they were supposed to, or they were, just really pushing my buttons intentionally, finally, then yeah, they made me, whatever, slap them, punch them, push them down the stairs, stun gun them, throw them out of a moving vehicle, try to run them over in the driveway. Actually, all of those are real examples of cases. And so I always got so motivated, right, by this argument. And I would say to my clients, no, it's not a legally valid argument for me to go and say that, yes, with your own hands, with your own mouth, you said these things where you threatened to kill them, and then you did it with your hands. Like, you literally committed these acts of violence. And I can't go in there unless you can give me some sort of a medical, credible reason why you don't control your own arms, or you don't control your own legs if you kick somebody, or you don't control your own body. I mean, some people do have medical conditions where they don't have control, But absent that, because none of my clients actually had that medical condition that they could prove. Absent that, I can't go in anywhere to anybody, a judge, anybody, a jury, anybody, and make these arguments, because they're not valid. You're in control of your body. Now, I would also argue that I believe that people should be in control of their thoughts. This is a whole different part of the equation. But my argument is that, yes, people say and do horrible things. People also say and do awesome, wonderful things, right? You never hear people complain and say, oh, I was getting all those compliments and everybody was telling me how, kind I am, and how generous and how good looking and attractive, and people were just telling me how much they admired me, and it just pushed me, just pushed my buttons, and before you knew it, I just did, whatever. I never hear that, because people, amazingly, their reactions apparently only are to things that they don't like, right? You never hear when somebody tells you or tells them something awesome about themselves that they would push their button. They seem able to control themselves in that situation. They just, it might be uncomfortable where they have to hear all the adulation, but they're able to control themselves, right? So the argument with this thing about your body, I think it's somewhat answered that we are in control of our own physical bodies, absent again some sort of physical or physiological condition that would be medically verified. The harder part of the equation is that I believe there's evidence at this point, who knows what the future evidence will bring, that we have some option with our thoughts. So in other words, that I'm moving my arm, right? Now there's a lot of research that shows that so much of this of our physical movements are so quick, right? The mind is, sends the message to the limbs really quickly, like almost faster than we can comprehend. And I've seen some great data and documentaries and information about the science behind trying to deal with someone who maybe has lost a limb in an accident or in a violence event, and trying to replicate with robotics and other science advances that the way that our bodies are able to process so much information in the reflexes, right? So that's fascinating. But I'm going to argue that we should have, now I'm not saying everyone does, right? Because there are people who are, quote, brainwashed. I don't like that term, but there are people who, for some variety of reasons, cede control of their thoughts, right? And it might be they join some sort of a cult, or they're in some sort of a Stockholm syndrome, where they've been abducted by someone, and then over time they actually begin to believe that their captor and the person who's done these horrible things to them is some sort of victim, and they feel for them. I mean, they choose to, quote, stay. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to all of this. It's fascinating. And when you look at white collar crime, even, right? You look at this idea of, how does somebody go out and convince people and steal hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars? So not just like a Bernie Madoff, who sort of was the poster child for this for a little bit, but there's all kinds of examples of this where it's just outright fraud and lies. But con artists do it all the time, right? You're controlling other people's thoughts to the point that if the people just ask themselves really basic questions: who are these people? Where are they from? Do they have any credibility with the things they're telling me about these, quote, investments? It would have never happened. The theft would never have been possible. But people are able to do a lot, right? To influence how people think. My argument is that we should, I argue, individually desire to take control of some of our thoughts, as many as possible, I would suggest, and that we do something about it. So when I look at this failure flashback, it's painful. Because every time in my life that I have been in a situation where I, quote, let someone else, right? I would argue a choice, make me doubt myself, or what, it could be any other thing, right? I believe that no one else can make me do anything. No one else can make me be violent to them and do horrible acts of violence or abuse. Nobody else can make, by pushing my buttons. And nobody else can make me, doubt myself. Now, I say that. And the reality, of course, in the failure flashback is that I didn't adhere to that all the time. That's why it's a reality that I failed with this. I did get myself in a situation where, in my own mind, I convinced myself that other people, their thoughts, their behavior, their words, what they've said and done, resulted in me doubting myself. Now, this has happened in many different settings. It's happened professionally. There have been numerous instances where I'm engaged in some sort of professional activity, and someone says or does something that could make me doubt myself. I was on a plane ride. This is pretty recently, and it was international, and so I was going to a big conference in another country, leaving from the States, going to another part of the world. And I was super excited, right? Because it was fun, and I'd never been to this part of the world before, so I was looking forward to it. So I was getting on the plane, and I sat next to my seatmate, and it was a long plane ride. It was like a over 14-hour flight where we're getting ready to start. So I thought it'll maybe be a little bit social and also be friendly, so hopefully we can get along and not have any problems over the next 14 hours. 14 plus hours on the flight. So we're talking and talking. Turns out the person next to me was a professor at some university in the United States. She never said which one. I never actually asked. But she was, seemed like a very nice person. Everything's fine. So she was going to the same, part of the world I was going to, although she's going to a different city eventually, and for some sort of work reason, I believe. So when we were talking, I started to do what I've advised in many other programs, right? Which is where we try to make other people feel really comfortable with us, and we try to engage other people in a way that gives them a positive impression of us. So when she started talking about being a professor working in higher education, I realized, okay, let me talk about something I have potentially in common with her. So I started to talk about the fact that I've done that in my career. I've taught it at traditional campus classes, and I've taught at more recently I teach in online classes for universities. So when I was talking to her about teaching traditional classrooms, she looked at me, and I just met her, right? So I don't know anything about her, but I made some perceptional based decisions, about her gender. I assumed she was female or identified as female based on the way she presented herself. I don't know her age. I mean, I would, I think I would say she was maybe over 60 years old, or somewhere between 60 and 80. I don't know. I mean, I'm just again, these are my own conclusions based on just looking at sort of her appearance and trying to, and the reason why I'm mentioning this isn't, I didn't think about it initially, but when we started talking and I was telling her that I used to teach traditional classes, and then I had taught at the university that I had gone to law school into undergrad, which is University of Texas at Austin, which I'm proud to have gone to that school and have worked there. And she said to me, she looked at me and she said something like, "Oh, it must have been really difficult for you walking into a classroom with no credibility." Wow. Wow. Now, of course, initially my first thought was, what? In my head, I don't say this, right? Because I'm trying to be friendly. We're going to just getting ready to start our big, long 14-hour plus journey together as seatmates. So initially in my head, I thought, what does she mean? Why would I walk into a classroom without credibility? And I immediately in my head, I was thinking like, well, what does she mean? Like, I have great academic credentials. I went to, very fine programs, and I finished school very early, right? I moved through my academic programs at a very young age, and I have, had very high test scores, and I had academic scholarships, and I start going in these things in my head, right? Trying to do what? What was I doing? I was trying to find a way, right, to shore up what she just said. I was trying to show in my head, I was trying to justify, well, no. Why would I not have any credibility? But what I was doing is I was doubting myself. Now here's a stranger I literally just met on a plane at an airport. The only thing and reason in life I'm even with this person at this moment is because we are just randomly sitting next to each other on a plane. I don't know them. They have no past events in my life. And in all honesty, I would suspect probably no future interaction in my life. And yet, I let a 4-minute conversation with someone who I don't know. I don't even know, right? Just this idea that, and she was, she was really serious. She was like, oh, must be tough walking in a classroom with no credibility. It all of a sudden I have this reaction where in my head I start trying to justify myself. I start thinking and trying to think, well, no, I should have credibility, right? Look at this and that and this and that. Here's the deal. That was a failure. I even if I did know my seatmate, let's say it had been my best friend for 20 years, it still shouldn't have resulted in me running right into a mental analysis of trying to prove myself, of doubting myself. Just because someone else says, oh, you don't have any credibility, does that mean I don't have any credibility? Now, so many times in our programs we talk about perception is reality. And I talk a lot about trying to see the world as it is, or at least how the best way we can understand it to be. I understand that this seatmate of mine believes, whatever, that I had no credibility. That's why she asked the question, right? I don't, that's one issue. I wasn't going to necessarily be able to convince her that I had credibility. On the other hand, was she going to be a student of mine potentially? I doubt it, because she already had apparently some She never named her where she worked, and again, I never asked, but she kept saying how it was a very elite institution, and when you call something an elite institution, either it shows your ego or it shows it really is, and you just don't want to name it because it might overwhelm people with how awesome it is. I don't know which the situation was. I also don't care. Why did I let somebody else take me from feeling really good and excited about going on this work opportunity, um, to dash me from that level of kind of elation and excitement and pride about this, really great opportunity for my work and for me as a person, right? To see more of the world, to learn about myself. Why did I let that throw me from that great mental place all the way down to I'm up here trying to justify why I was in a classroom? And I mean, and it happened within minutes. That's just one example. I have so many examples. We could probably do, I don't know, 1,000 shows on examples where people have said or done something, and all of a sudden I turn that on myself and make it a weapon and start going through, well, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I should I be here? Do I deserve this? Am I too ugly? Am I too stupid? Am I too young? Am I too old? I mean, it happens so quickly. So when we look at our failure flashback series, we always want to ask a couple of questions. How did it happen? How did I respond? What solutions did I deploy? And how do I remain vigilant today? And these are all in the show notes. So how did it happen? It happened because there are things that form our sort of mental framework processes from the so early on in our lives. In many instances, there's arguments of, before we even potentially came into existence, right? The diet and nutrition and the genetic makeup of our biological parents, and we have no control over any of that. And then, of course, our own individual traits and genes and personality, uh, and our own diet from an early age, environmental factors, pollution, things of that nature. Um, if there was any situation where we were subject ever to abuse or anxiety or violence, all of this. So even though, we get to points in our lives where we should feel pretty good about something. I mean, nobody should ever walk around, I think, it's not healthy, thinking, I'm perfect. Look at all the wonderful things about me. I mean, that's silly. One, no one's ever going to be perfect. Perfection is not anything that exists in a sustained format. It's just something that we might aim to be better. The other thing is, as an intellectual person, we should be curious about life. We should always be learning new things and growing. I can't learn new things and grow if I think I'm perfect and I know everything. But no matter where we are in life, how did it happen? It happened because there's layers, right? Like there's subterranean strata, there's layers of things in life that impact us. So much of it we aren't even sort of consciously aware of. And these things can be triggered. Now, this doesn't mean that, quote, other people push our buttons and then we just act out in any way that's self-destructive or destructive to other people or violent or whatever. What it means is, though, there's so much in our mind, and there's so much in our psyche, and we can't forget that, you know? And how did it happen? It happened because there are all of these. It, I don't even know how many, right? I'm sure the best minds in the world are trying to figure out how many ideas. What is a memory? What makes that up? I don't know. I'm hopeful that I live long enough to see what some scientists are able to discern, but there's a lot going on, right? I did a show here where we talked about the 70,000 thoughts a day that, according to UCLA Science Laboratory, that we think 70,000 thoughts a day. So there's a lot that's happening. So when someone says or does something that may trigger in us some sort of latent or even a more explicit and obvious issue, then it can take us to this place where we start to turn on ourselves. And we've done so many programs we talk about all the time. In a war against yourself, a fight against yourself, you're going to lose. Now, the fact that this lady doesn't believe I'm credible, whatever, fine. What I mean by whatever is I can't control it. All right. The thing is, though, I also, when she said that, what it probably did was trigger in me the idea that I knew other people didn't think I was credible either. I knew that, and I've shared other stories about some instances where I've been made to be fully aware of the fact that my presence in certain job titles in certain settings was less than enthusiastically supported by everyone. But there's no one who gets 100% support. The challenge though in life is when you go through life and you get a lot of messages, and we get messages about who we are and what our culture is and what our expectations are and what we're capable of, and we get messages based on our nationality. People think certain things just by virtue of being the American culture for a while. It's true, because that's their messages and norms and the culture you sort of absorb. We think certain things based on what we hear about gender, based on what we hear about age, based on what we hear about color, based on what we hear about religion. I mean, all this goes into your head. And so sometimes other people can say and do things that do trigger in us this moment where if we're not vigilant, right? That's the last question in my analysis. How do I remain vigilant today? A lot of it is I try to tell myself, look, you chose this. You chose to be here. You're not here by accident. You chose to be here. Now, what do you want? Well, I wanted to have a nice plane ride. Okay. So why are you going to let this person you just met ruin the plane ride? You're proud of the work you've done. Not every day. I've had horrible failures in every single professional activity where everything went horribly wrong on a certain day or a project, or I, oh, and we'll do other programs on as many of those as I can share, right? Like, my worst days ever in certain jobs, or when I messed up and just made a disaster of something. But overall, I choose me. And that sounds of course, grammatically it's incorrect. But what I mean is, I choose to define myself. I choose this life. I chose to be on that plane ride to go take that professional opportunity, even though, of course, I was excited, but I was also a little frightened. I'd never been there, and I was going by myself, right? Other parts of the world, who knows? But I chose this, and I'm not going to let other people, whether it's some stranger, or it's a relative, or it's a best friend, or it's somebody who I thought cared about me in some personal relationship or romantic relationship, I'm not going to let them define me. I define. If I want to doubt myself, I should be able to sit around and do that and have a pity party all by myself, just with no other catalyst. But I have got to remain vigilant at all times. That this is the propensity that people have for self-destruction is just incredible. And I don't think we can ever get to a point where we're complacent and we feel like, oh, I'm good. I'm so good. I'm sure there's nothing that will happen that will, make me doubt myself. I don't think that's realistic. And we see it all the time with famous people or wealthy people or people who are revered, and then they engage in self-harm and self-destruction, and you think, well, how could that happen? Well, because this is something you must remain vigilant of. The propensity and the ability that we have to turn on ourselves and start fighting and even destroy ourselves. So how did I respond in real life on the plane? Honestly, I went through all this in my head, not all, but pretty much. I went through the thought part where I tried to, in my head, justify why I was there and try to want to make an argument in my head of I have credibility. And then I remembered that I chose to be on this plane ride. I chose to go take this work adventure, and I'm defining me in my life. And that if this lady shared that she doesn't think I have any credibility, and okay, but that's her choice for her life. And at this moment on a plane ride, I don't have to win her over. Even if she was in my class, I don't have to win her over. She's going to make her decisions and I'm going to make mine. So she's shared what she thinks about me, fine. I'm not one that believes you're going to get anything in life and sort of getting into negative downward spirals of pain and inflicting pain on others. So I mean, some people might have said, well, you should have said to her, what's your credibility? What do you do? Like, what would be the point? I honestly, and I didn't even think about that because it's not I'm working and continuing to work on practicing the joyful art of my business. Big picture of my life. So there's not room for me to get into some sort of negative attack to hurt other people. Often what people say is a reflection of themselves. Maybe she struggles with credibility in her classrooms. I don't know. So how did I respond when I finally did speak? Let that sit for a little bit. I just said something like, well, life is an adventure, and you just do the best you can every day. What was my point? I'm not going to acknowledge this. I'm not even going to get into a discussion with it. I'm not going to even follow up with her and ask her what she meant by it. Honestly, what's the point? The point is, my goal is to sit there in the plane and have a nice plane ride. Most of I was going to sleep, which is what I did. And I redirected the conversation away from getting into some more elaborate discussion of my failures as a professional in her mind, or anything else that was going to be negative. Because what would be the point? And when I say what would be the point, I really mean that. I just needed to like get on that transportation. We hadn't even taken off when this conversation started. So when I said we had a long flight ahead of us, like I'm not going to waste this big chunk of my time and some sort of thing with a stranger, or even like I said, someone who I thought was a best friend. I don't care if it had been somebody I'd known for 20 years or a relative or something. Why destroy myself? If I choose to destroy myself, I'll choose to destroy myself. No one else is going to, quote, make me doubt myself. I can do that on my own. But I want to take responsibility and ownership for my body and for as much of my mind as is reasonable or that I believe is possible. So the solutions I deployed were to bring myself back to that same question: what do I want? What's my goal? My goal is to get through the flight calmly. What is the other goal I have? That I decide. It's my life. No one else is going to make me do anything. And other people have input. Other people have ideas. I have people I admire and respect and and care about immensely. But whether or not somebody doubts themselves is their choice. So the solutions I deploy, again, I remain in my mind aware this will be a lifelong struggle to either accept myself and believe in myself, or to doubt myself and be destructive toward myself. What other people say or do is just an extra layer on top of it. But I want to believe, whether or not I actually am, whether or not the science in the end shows that I had any real um, measure of control. I want to believe that I do. And I just don't want to believe that if someone else tells me I'm a loser or I'm a failure, then I'm a failure. I don't want to go to that and accept that as fact at this point, because it's going to potentially put me in a position where I don't know what options I'll have for better solutions if other people are going to define everything. And I remain vigilant today by again giving that same quick check. I asking myself, what do you want? What do you want? And reminding myself, at least for the time being, that I choose to believe that I have some control over my body, over my arms, my legs, over what I do in terms of being violent or aggressive, whether over what I do in terms of what I say, and over what I do in trying to believe that I have some ability to define myself. So again, I am so appreciative and grateful that you joined me today to be part of the program. You can always come to CourtneyAnderson.com and share what's on your mind. And again, thank you for being part of what we did here today. Thanks.